I'm going to ask the question, do I have a basis for owning this land? And okay, so I own it. What does that mean? It means my signature is on actually it's on a lease. So I sort of own it. In fact, I live in a weird community, so I don't totally own it. So let's say I don't live in a weird community for the sake of this video. Okay. Um, all right. So usually we own our land because we have bought our house, and it happens to sit on some land. That's fine. Um, but do we really? Suppose I'm in America, so suppose I get sick for 3 months and I didn't pay my mortgage. Probably after about 2 months, I'm going to start getting letters from the mortgage company. Your mortgage is in serious trouble. We're going to start some sort of proceedings, right? So, in other words, if I don't continue to pay my mortgage every single month, then I find out I actually don't own my land. Even if I've paid already a large amount to it, even if I'm near the end of my mortgage, I can still get foreclosed on. So, um, so then I don't totally own my land, really. And what? So then the bank is involved here, right? The bank somewhat owns my land, because our whole system is based on mortgages when it comes to owning your house and the land under it. And usually young people don't realize that when they get a mortgage for, say, a $200,000 house, they'll probably end up paying more than $400,000 for that house over a period of 30 years, depending on the mortgage rate and so on, the interest rate. So that's a pretty weird system because it means you're almost never free and clear in a mortgage situation because you have to pay such a lot of money over such a lot of time. And that would be fine if wages were high and you could sort of pay it off quickly and it was a small part of your paycheck that went to your mortgage, but that's way in the past. Okay, so why do we own land? Do I own land because my parents owned it and left it to me? Yeah, actually that's one way that you can own land. And you could get some land that way. At some point, most countries would have a limit to how much you could inherit, but say it's pretty easy to get around those limits if you have businesses, take your children into partnership, that sort of thing. So, yeah, to some extent, you can inherit land, but do you really own it again? So, let's think about the indigenous people, their opinion on this, and that is that everybody owns land collectively and equally. Or actually, more to the point, there's no such thing as owning land. So they don't think there's any ownership of land. It's not possible. It's just not part of their thinking because they think of land as something much deeper and more meaningful than the way that we think of it. So where did these systems diverge? So if you go back in history, somewhere down the line, let's take Henry VIII, for instance, then at some point he needed the support of the gentry. So how do you do that? Well, you take away the land that has previously been held in common and you distribute it instead to the people who you want support from. And then it belongs to them. So from that point, anybody who's working the land actually then has to pay a huge tribute to this new owner. And that's where the term landed gentry came from. So what was different? Well, the difference is before you had the right to use the land, to use some part of the land. After that happens, you don't have the right. You are allowed to by your feudal lord, but you have to pay for that. It's quite heavily. You have to pay for it. So there's always the argument that you own the land if you work it. So how does that work? Suppose somebody owns lots of land but never does anything with it, and then somebody else is actually working some of the land. Do they have a right to own it? So that's another factor that comes in, and all of these factors actually sort of play a role in our relationship with land. So yes, there are some reasons to own land, although I would say all of those reasons could be amply satisfied by simply strengthening the right to exclusive use of land. It sort of, allows for the idea that if you use land, then you somehow inherit the right to it in some way, and that's true. That's true because, part of our role is in the planet is to take care of the land, and but then think about the person who owns land and just keeps it because he knows that, say, in 20 years' time, it will have increased in value such a huge amount that he can sell it at a great profit. Meanwhile, he's not doing anything with the land; it's just sitting there, and it can be getting into a very bad state. So, for instance, suppose there's a large chain that decides to pull out of a certain location. So their building is still there, their parking lot is still there, but nobody's using it. 20, 30 years, nobody's using it. It just grows weeds and becomes destroyed, basically. So I know of a situation where a town decided that they would put a land value tax on their land. That's how they would raise their taxes. When they did that, then the company that had that land that their building was sitting on and deteriorating, they suddenly had to pay a certain amount every year just for the privilege of having that land. So then it started to be used. Then they started to do something positive with it. And that's how a land value tax would work, because it would compensate the community for somebody holding on to land and not allowing anybody else to use it. So yes, you think there are very legitimate concerns on both sides, but I think that it's something that we really need to talk about, because right now, ultimately, we own land because the government says we do, because of our system. The government has arranged it basically so that they can, give out the right to own land via the system of the banks and so on, the economic system of different countries. So who is the government? It's us, the people, who really ultimately are the government. We seem to be giving legitimacy to a lot of governments that we should maybe not be giving legitimacy to. So it's time to really start thinking as people, as the people. How should we arrange land? How should we arrange the ownership of land? Should we put on a land value tax? Is there a reason to do that? Does it make any sense at all that almost 100% of the land is actually owned by somebody, and therefore nobody else can go to it, even if it's just woods and nature and it's beautiful? So yes, in America we have a system of state parks and national parks. Yeah, you can go there and you can, you're free to move around within certain constraints. But you can't go anywhere else because it's all privately owned. So you would be trespassing if you go anywhere else. So then, that means most people are really, really cut off from nature. People live in these huge cities and they're cut off from nature. No wonder there's problems in the huge cities because of the lack of access to nature. Okay, we're definitely going to be talking more about this.